Today's question is, how do you add a custom domain name to a static website in S3? So you might have seen from a previous video we have a static website running in an S3 bucket in this case, and the typical format is you get the bucket name plus all this extra stuff, so it's not really very human friendly and it's also not secure. So the simple question is, how do you add your custom domain name? There are several methods. Firstly, there's the option of using Route 53, which is Amazon's fully managed domain service where you can register a domain and set up all your DNS hosting. For many people that's not really an option because their domain names are already registered. The second option is if you have your domain name registered at a third party like GoDaddy or Name.com and you just want to change the name servers to point to Amazon so they host all of the name servers. Again, this isn't that common simply because of the disruption it can cause for established domain names. And the third option is just to take a subdomain www.yourdomain.com or mysubdomain.domain.com and just point that subdomain. And you can do that with a CNAME, which I'll be showing you in this video. There are some issues with CNAMEs. Just be aware that you cannot point Apex or naked domain names to CNAMEs in some registrars. It really depends on who you're registered with. But for something like login.mydomain.com, that's perfectly easy. There are some benefits to doing this with Amazon. Firstly, the Ssl certificates are free and they're very fast to set up and they're secure. They're automatically managed for you and renewed every 13 months, so it really takes the pain out of managing large numbers of domains. Although there's a limit to the number of certificates you can ask for per account, they will raise the limit if you raise a ticket with their support. So first things first, let's go to Certificate Manager. Although Certificate Manager exists in every region, if you're planning to use it on Cloudfront, you need to make sure that the certificates are created in US East 1 or North Virginia. So switch the region if that's necessary. Request a certificate, make sure it's a public certificate in this case, and enter the domain name you want to use. It's often worth adding a wildcard certificate name to the certificate just in case you want to use more subdomains in the future. Click Next, and there's two different ways to validate this. So DNS validation means you get given a code, which if you have access to the DNS you can add into the records very easily, which is the method we'll be doing in this video. If you don't have access to the DNS, you can also use email validation. Amazon will send an email to any of the registered contacts at the domain and you have to follow a series of steps. If you choose the email validation option, one of the problems is you have to do this every year before they automatically revalidate the certificate. So for the DNS validation option, we continue to confirm a request through the UI here, and if we click the arrows dropping down on the side there, you'll see these are the records that we need to add. So if I log into my DNS provider, which in this case is name.com for this dummy domain I'm using, I click on DNS records and I'm going to cut and paste these records across from this screen to this screen. When you copy across these records, there are a few gotchas in terms of making sure there are not trailing periods in these records and also just selecting the right record type. In this case, you need to make sure that these are CNAMEs. Once you've added these, depending on your registrar, this can take anything from a few minutes to several days to propagate, but you'll know once you go back to the Amazon window. This takes a little bit of time to catch up, but these will be showing as validated very soon. While we're waiting for these domain name changes to propagate, what we can do is set up the Cloudfront distribution to point in front of the S3 bucket. So back over here, you remember our S3 bucket has this long domain name. What we want to do is replace this with the shorthand domain name. The best way to do that is with a Cloudfront distribution. This takes about 20 minutes to set up, usually a little bit longer for the first time. So from the Cloudfront service, click Create Distribution. This is a global service, so it won't matter which region you were in previously. And what's important here is that back in your S3 bucket, you will have set this as static web hosting. You need to make sure you have the endpoint address here. So we just take a copy of this. And from Cloudfront, paste this into the origin domain name. One of the common errors here is to use the bucket URL, not the static website host. There are a couple of options here that confuse people as well. So the viewer protocol policy This is from the point of view of your visitors. So if they type in your domain name without HTTPS, you can choose to have it redirected, or you can choose to take both protocols. Usually it's less recommended to say HTTPS only because many people don't know how to type that in and they will simply time out in the browser. So the most common option is to select redirect HTTP to HTTPS. For a basic static website, you don't need anything else other than get or head in the HTTP methods. And for our example, we're going to use all the basic defaults that are set up here. We will change this last one saying compress objects automatically as well. A little further down, here is where we put the domain name that we want this distribution to use. So in this case, it will be this subdomain. And then in the custom Ssl certificate section, sometimes you might not find your certificate appears here immediately if it's a brand new one. So what you can do is, once the certificate has been issued, in Certificate Manager, scroll down and just find the ARN for that certificate and paste that in here. The rest of that is all fine. Now we hit Create Distribution. While the distribution is being set up, what we can do is take the distribution name from here and go back into the domain name registrar and set up the CNAME. So in this case, we're setting up a CNAME for login dot to go to this Cloudfront distribution. We can add this record now. Even though the rest of the distribution is not ready yet, this also takes a while to propagate, so it pays to do them both at the same time. So this is about 20 minutes later, a full pot of coffee later, and we found that now that the Cloudfront distribution is finally deployed. So what does all this mean? Well, if you remember from the original challenge, we went from this not secure URL that was this long name from S3, and we wanted to make this a HTTPS custom domain name. So we added this through Certificate Manager. This was issued, and then we added that to the Cloudfront distribution, which is now deployed. So we see this is the Cloudfront domain name. If we paste that in, you'll see that that also takes you to the same page. But finally, we can now use our custom domain, which is this, and you'll see it takes us to the same bucket, but now we have HTTPS and our custom domain name. So this is a fairly long process. It takes a few times to get it right because it's fairly tricky coordinating all of the different changes in the DNS registrar and on AWS's side, and there are some delays in between that can create uncertainty. But if you get it right, it's actually very easy to set up. Additionally, this then basically works forever. This certificate will be renewed automatically. This bucket will stay there serverlessly, distributing its content regardless of the traffic that arrives. Putting Cloudfront in front of our S3 bucket gives us certain advantages in terms of security as well. We have WAF protection automatically applied to Cloudfront distributions, and we can also exclude certain countries from visiting the distribution if we so choose. That's it for this video. Thanks very much, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.